Hello, everyone, and welcome to MyCHN podcast, Health Conversations Without Barriers. I am Mariela, and this is the CHN gang.
Hi all, I'm Olga.
Hi, I'm Elijah.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today, everyone. This is a very high requested documentary by me. Yes, I requested this. We'll be doing a quick summary of the Netflix documentary, The Pharmacist. So let's start with the first episode. And it's called Justice for Danny. It starts with the introduction of Mr. Dan Schneider. The episode starts with him being very nervous around the camera, right? Around the director. He wants to see what's coming up next. And then he starts saying his life story, right? How he became a pharmacist. And obviously, he's the main character because it's called The Pharmacist and he's the pharmacist. And sort of starts by saying how his son was murdered when he was buying crack. Did anyone else got shocked when he said that? I know I did.
Especially since his son was so young. That's really kind of all
Yes.
of it. Myself just from being like a young man, just starting your life. And it was like, wow.
Correct. So the setting, this documentary starts in St. Bernard Parish, Louisiana. So there are neighbors. We're here in Texas. And next to New Orleans. It's a middle-class community that they get a lot of commerce from seafood and pretty much construction, very blue collar community. And when his son was murdered, Mr. Dan felt like the cops were not doing enough to solve the case, to find the killer. So he took his matters on his own hands and pretty much he did what most mothers and fathers would do. He had that drive just to solve the case. Do you guys remember what Mr. Dan described himself as in the documentary?
Yes, so I believe he said he was almost obsessive. So he was so determined to find his son's murderer that he was willing to do anything, pretty much obsessed with the idea.
And it kind of goes into also the part where he and his family were going through, the shock of receiving those news and trying to, I guess, deal with that pain. And they talk about almost considering suicide as a family. What do you guys think was going through their mind when they were considering this?
That was a shock to me. They would even talk about that as a family, that they could communicate those deep kind of emotions to each other.
Yeah, so definitely that was a very devastating moment for me, just watching that part of them, crying and just figuring out that their son is murdered is breaking my heart. It's almost, making me go through all of those emotions, and I cannot obviously relate because thanks God I didn't have that experience, but that's really devastating. And they are considering committing suicide. It's very shocking to me, definitely.
Shocking for me as well, especially just the family aspect, that they would all consider that together. Um, and it goes to show how much of a loss this was for them and how sad it was for them.
Yes, I agree. So let's talk about grief for a moment. How did Mr. Dan use his grief in the murder to solve the murder of his son?
So the grief becomes pretty much like his power that's moving him, that to go ahead and do everything he can. That's pretty much what gives him the purpose to live further without his son. Just the idea of getting justice for Danny and finding that murderer.
So now they kind of talk about this part of a community, right? So this is the Ninth Ward in St. Bernard Parish. And Mr. Dan talks about the white flag. Do you guys know what that was?
That was when the African Americans started to move into that neighborhood, when it was predominantly white. And then once they started moving in, it wasn't predominantly white anymore.
Yes.
They started moving to different areas, and then the neighborhood changed and became a different kind of neighborhood.
So also in the documentary, it talks about how Mr. Dan was going, he had this motivation to find the killer, right? So he was trying to find clues. And he was pretty much going door by door, knocking, trying to see, hey, do you hear something on this night? Do you see anything? Where were you? And this is when he meets the pastor, right, of that community in the Ninth Ward. So how do you guys think the pastor helped Mr. Dan and his family besides moral support and protection?
So I think the pastor becomes a really important part of Danny's journey of finding justice. So he really goes to church to just speak his mind, and pastor becomes his mentor. And I think maybe his talk with pastor is more like a therapy for him. So it helps him out throughout the whole search.
Yes, like for example, I know like in Hispanic communities, sometimes the church, they I know counseling, therapy, psychiatry, they don't really see it as something that they should seek, but what they seek is talk to the pastor, talk to the pastor's wife, and just kind of heal from that. But in a form, it is therapy, but they do not see that as therapy.
Yeah, because I believe therapy and counseling is popularity of that is relatively new. So back at that time, I think church was a lot like mental health support for people in a way.
So we're gonna go now to episode 2, Mission from God. So this is where actually Mr. Dan so Mr. Dan is no longer knocking on doors. He is also now calling people name by name by name. And this is when we meet Shane. Shane is the witness of, the murder. And we also find out that Shane was battling with addiction herself. How do you guys think this made her not come forward to the authorities for what she knew?
So yes, absolutely. I believe it was really hard for her to come out, knowing that she is the only witness of the crime, and uh, the murderer is actually somebody she knows and somebody she was in a very good relationship with. So that's definitely very hard for her, especially knowing that she has an addiction and she knows that the murder is actually related to, drugs. So um, she is a very brave woman to actually saying, Mr. Dan called the right house, and I really did see the murder.
Just to add to that, she also has to kind of deal with the cultural stigma of saying that she saw anything. A lot of times in her community and in many communities like that in urban areas or African American communities, there's a stigma of we don't talk to the police scene. So she had to overcome that as well because there can be some serious repercussions in some situations.
So now we get introduced to Jeffrey Hall and Scarface. So do you see that coming? What do you think about the way that he lied to Mr. Dan about what he had seen or what he knew?
Yes, so Jeffrey actually was first introduced as a witness of the crime. He pretty much lied to Mr. Dan and trying to point at somebody else as a murderer. So when Mr. Dan finds out that Shane is a murderer, he's shocked. He is in disbelief. He don't want to believe that because he was so sure that Jeffrey is actually helping him, but in fact, he was the murderer.
I can understand from Jeffrey's point of view why he would try and pin it on someone else, given his age and just he was 16 or something like that. He was very young, and the circumstances that he was in at that age. And so I can understand it from that perspective. I can also understand Dan's perspective of like he's interviewing someone who he thinks is a witness that's going to lead him to finding who killed his son, and the whole time this person is the one that killed his son. So there's a lot going on there.
Definitely. So the trial, Shane comes forward. She finds the strength within herself to tell the truth. And on November 21st, 2000, Jeffrey goes to jail for 15 years. And this part made me really sad because he had a very rough upbringing as a child. And he said that his first trip out of the city was in a jail bus. And I found that so sad because, I'm in my late 20s and I see a 16-year-olds. I know they're not a child, but in my mind, they are. And I found that very, very sad.
It is definitely devastating moment to just see that happen because Jeffrey is so young and he was just influenced by the way he grew up, the way what he see around him, the community. He didn't maybe mean to do that, but it just kind of happened to him. And now, I would say, I know they say there in the song there's a saying, I'm a victim of the system and now I'm a suspect to a victim. So he pretty much is that he's a victim of the system and now he has to pay for that.
There are a lot of areas like that as well, where people are kind of. I think that's one thing that kind of goes unmentioned in our in America, is that everyone's kind of in their own little neighborhood, no matter what the income is or the social economic status, whatever. We're all kind of in these places, and we don't often see the outside. And in some circumstances, in Jeffrey's case, there can be a lot of negative impacts, a lot of negative effects from that.
I agree. So we do have a positive. Shane gets help. She gets clean. It's good for her and for her family. She gets awarded in the Citizens Against Crime Annual Awards Night. She gets an award. And shout out to you, Shane. You're an amazing woman, and we're very proud of you. And now, right? So now that they have the closure, they know who it is, they've gotten justice, but they're trying to go back to their normal lives. Mr. Dan and his family are trying to go back to their normal lives. And why do you guys think they did not have a closure? Why do you think they couldn't get back to a normal life routine?
So the family finds it hard to go back. They still grieving, they still trying to find out why this happened. And you know the name of this episode, the mission from God, is actually very relevant because now finding out the drug issue, Mr. Dan, it becomes his mission to stop that, help other parents, prevent some other deaths, hopefully. So it becomes his mission from God, and that's what kind of helps him move on and recover from his son's death.
Okay, so now we kind of see, that again, but they do try to go back to their regular routine. So they go back to work. Mr. Dan goes back to work. And Mr. Cloud, who is the owner of the pharmacy, gave Mr. Dan the freedom to, take breaks when he needs it. So thank you, Mr. Cloud. You're a very good employer. How did Mr. Dan use his tape recorder in this case?
He started recording, well, just about everything. I think that was still a part of his grieving process because it was always on for years. But he started recording all of his interactions with his customers, because he's at this point, he's working at the pharmacy. He's back to work. So he's starting to notice a lot of teenagers around, and young adults around his son's age coming in, requesting these large amounts of prescription painkillers that can be fatal amounts for kind of minor ailments. So he started recording these conversations, and that's kind of what led him to his next to the next point.
So now we get introduced into Purdue Pharma and Oxycontin. And then you see all these commercials from the 90s. You see this like infomercials. You see magazines with the advertising. To be honest, I really did not know much about this. It wasn't until I kind of started working in the healthcare field, but still it wasn't, I would say, that I could go back and say, oh, I know exactly who created Oxycontin. I really did not know. Do you guys knew maybe a little bit more about it, or?
I didn't know very much about it. I just knew there was a long name to it, and 9 times out of 10, I wasn't going to be taking any of it.
Same.
Yeah, all I knew is that this drug is very, very strong, but at the time it was one of the best drugs to for painkiller. That it was very helpful, but people didn't know how addictive it can be.
So this is when, we see the commercials, right? Then we get introduced to Dr. Ann Lemke. And I'm so sorry, Dr. Lemke, I'm pretty sure I'm butchering your name. She said the one pill of Oxycontin is 16 Percocets. And then she tells about the three opioid epidemics, or, you know, that we have seen this country. The first one was the Industrial Revolution, where if baby were teething, they would give them heroin. Again, it is a pain reliever. I'm pretty sure it worked, but we're talking about heroin for babies. The second one is Vietnam War, because the soldiers came back with some opioids that they have found at Vietnam. And then the next one is the one that we're in right now. And I know we kind of pointed this out. The clientele that was coming into Mr. Dan's pharmacy, the pharmacy was very young, right? And then we see another woman that by her name M. She does not say her full name, so it's only M. That's everything we know her for. And how did she say all the kids were getting their pills in that community?
So the community is a community of people who work a lot of physical labor jobs, labor intensive jobs. So over time, the parents of these teenagers had developed injuries, so naturally they would need painkillers for these injuries that they got on the job. So the teenagers were going into their parents' medicine cabinets, and one way or another discovered the effects that the medications had, and they started giving them to their friends, and it kind of builds up from there.
Okay. Then we get introduced to Ravi, right? And in a way, Mr. Dan saved Ravi's life from addiction. And he talked about how he knew he was addictive because he had suffered a car accident and his back was hurt. So he knew that he needed to get those pills, and that he recognized in himself that he really, really needed those pills, and he was pretty much willing to go from maybe pharmacy to pharmacy to get them. So, um, what do you guys think of the way he got those pills prescribed? Because he talks about a pediatrician that was switching from pediatrics to pain management, Dr. Jacqueline Cleggett, and she would prescribe the Holy Trinity. Do you guys know what the Holy Trinity is?
It was Oxycontin and some other things. It was
Yes. So it was they call it Holy Trinity because it's Oxycontin, Somas, and Xanax. So it says that it's a very dangerous combination. Do you guys know why it's a dangerous combination?
just slows your heart rate down as you sleep. It only takes a small amount to overdose.
So it says yes, but also one of the reasons is it's a dangerous combination is because it says that it gives you a heroin effect. So it's the closest thing to giving you a heroin effect. And it also helps you kind of like ease a little bit out of it. But at the end of the day, you can easily overdose. I was shocked when Mr. Dan noticed that Dr. Cleggett had a trend for Oxycontin, right? So he says that he prints it out and he says Oxycontin, Dr. Cleggett, Oxycontin, Dr. Cleggett, Oxycontin, Dr. Just keeps going, keeps going. Do you guys notice at what time her office would open and how many people will be there? Do you guys notice that?
So I don't remember the exact number, but I remember them saying that she was having over 100 appointments or patients a day, which is physically not even possible. So Mr. Dan definitely started noticing something wrong with this doctor, and he definitely knows that something wrong is with the drugs as well. They are very addictive. So he tries to stop people from, getting those prescriptions, but he cannot because it actually gets prescribed by a doctor. So at this point, he cannot do anything.
Correct. And oh my gosh, I was honestly shocked when they said it's almost right because Mr. Dan and he told his wife, "All right, let's go see if her office is open." And it was almost 3 a.m. and there was a huge line of people waiting, sleeping in their cars, trying to get the pills. And Ravi said that, I'm sorry guys, but at this point, Ravi and Mr. Dan kind of decide to partner up and they decide, to go to FBI. But going a little bit back, it's just how Ravi was saying, I've had friends that have been there in her office for 2 days. 2 days. Can you guys imagine waiting in a doctor's office for 2 days and you pay cash only?
So I
So
believe at this point, this became kind of like a side hustle for some people because these drugs became very expensive and the prices were rising and people were willing to, sleep in a car and wait for hours just to get that prescription because of how much money it could bring.
yes. So exactly that it became kind of like getting and selling, right? Selling back to other people, taking some for yourself, but selling. So now we see Mr. Dan and Mr. Robin go to the FBI and then DEA trying to, kind of get the authorities to help. We just see kind of like a back and forward. I don't know if you guys noticed, but they were kind of like ignoring him at some point where he just like kept calling, and they
Yeah, so
were
I think here the obsessiveness for Mr. Dan comes out where he is becomes a little bit annoying, but he is very determined to, of his mission. So
yes, we definitely see that.
It was so funny because they would on during the documentary they would reference, well, yeah, Dan would be like, yeah, I'm at this point I'm calling all the FBI's office, and then right after he says that, they'll play a clip of him, the phone recording of him calling the office. You can hear the FBI, the police, they're all just obviously annoyed and irritated and not being very shy about it. I thought that was so fun. Every time he mentioned that, they had like the receipts for it.
Yes, he had receipts. That's what we call he had receipts. And they're saying, are you recording? He's like, no. But he was recording. All right. So then we go back to Dr. Ann Lemke, right? And do you guys know what she calls Dr. Kleggett's operation, her whole setup? She calls it a pill mill.
oh wow. That sounds like that actually.
Yes. So the way she describes it, right? So a pill mill is, it says, when doctors have lost their moral compass and do not do diligence. I'm so sorry, guys. Sometimes I'm ESL, guys. So, if you're driving and you're like, what did she just say? It's due diligence. So she pretty much said that when the doctors have to do due diligence, that means, they talk to you about your history, your medical history. They see any blood work. Sometimes if you have a caretaker, then they talk to your caretaker. There's a lot. And this is where she says, on a super busy day, I see 20, 25 people. And we're talking about, labs, history, okay, what medication are you in? All this due diligence that they do. Okay, I'll see you in 2 weeks. Let's see how this is working. And obviously, Dr. Jacqueline Cleggett was not doing that because if people were there, if we're talking about more than 20 something patients, that is not possible just for one person. So yes, this is a pill mill. Dr. Jacqueline Clegger was running a pill mill. And and let me go back. And now, we see that obsession of Mr. Dan trying to stop her. And in a way, yes, it is an obsession. Because he continues, and he's trying to do something good, which is saving people. But how do you guys see this taking over the family, affecting his family, his life, his personal connection with his family.
This point, I think Danny, his son, was killed in 1997. At this point, it's 2001. So he hasn't really stopped. They had all the drug stuff, all the door knocking, him talking about it. It hasn't stopped for what, four? I'm not, math is not, 4 years, something like that. And so that definitely had to weigh on his family. I can imagine from his daughter's standpoint. I mean, she's still in high school, probably early adult by this point. You probably didn't really get a chance to really, really grieve. He's getting to grieve because he's working through it, but them it's just like probably a bit of an overload for like.
Yeah, I agree. Like, because you hear a kind of like a argument between his family, right? His daughter, his wife, they're saying, "Can you stop, please? Like, let's not talk about this right now. We're trying to talk about something else another time." And you just see this like a big conflict. It's a conflict. It's affecting his life, his personal life with his family. So guys, we're going to stop here. We're gonna do the episode 3 and 4 soon, so stay tuned for that. And don't forget to demonstrate your love by sharing this podcast with your friends and family and giving us a review on Spotify or iTunes. Thank you guys, and until next time.